So let's get right into it. This is about unlocking different paths to capital, because I think we all know the numbers. Newsflash, they've gotten worse. Women are now receiving 1.3% of all venture capital. So with working from hundreds of entrepreneurs at Female Founder Collective and seeing the different types of capital that every business needs but not knowing about it, I really want to get clarity, and this is an all of you answer question. What is the biggest misconception about why female founders struggle to raise capital, and what have you seen them do differently? So we'll start with you, Tiffany.
I think one of the biggest misconceptions about raising capital is that the investor is investing in the business when they're investing in the founder. Years ago, as I was building a company called The Crew, I had the opportunity to have a gentleman, I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning his name, it's Scott Heiferman. He's the founder of a company called Meetup. He came to one of our events very early on, and during the event, The Crew was a company that matched women in accountability circles to help them meet their life goals. And he was observing what was happening in the room, and he looked at me and he said to me, "Isn't it amazing when they show up?" And as a community builder, a community weaver, I could tell that he was having one of those moments where you listlessly reminisce about the past. And in that moment, I realized, oh, Scott is seeing me, and he's seeing a past version of himself. Part of the human condition is that we invest in people who remind us of a past version of ourselves. That's why all of my mentees are all young Black women, because I'm investing in a previous version. And so one of my Tiffany's epiphanies, that's what I call my aha moments, was that as a founder who was raising at that time, I needed to focus on what was the connection that would help this person to see a past version of themselves in me, because people are really making an investment in the person. And it's very challenging, but one of the things that I'm seeing at the Tory Burch Foundation, our mission, by the way, is to increase women's economic power. We do that by supporting women entrepreneurs. And time again, I'm seeing them use alternative forms of capital. The most important one being revenue from customers, in order to really grow their businesses. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I think that's the biggest misconception, and really figuring out how do we crack the humanity code to help people understand that they can see themselves in other people and that people are really worth making the investment in.
I would just jump in on that and say I totally agree. I think we also are up against pattern matching, which is also kind of similar to what you're talking about, which is the fact that VCs invest in people that remind them of people who have made them money in the past. And if they're investing 99% of their dollars in white men, they're going to keep investing in white men. So I think the misconception is it's the female founder's fault, but I actually think it's more of an internal problem at venture capital, that they don't have internal GPs and analysts and associates that look more like us and have a relationship to the type of products we're building. So I would say it's that. We'll do waves. So I would say that's also a misconception, is that it's on the female founders.
Yeah, and I was going to say also getting in the room is really hard, and I think that's hard when you're seeing, as a VC person, you're seeing a pitch book that is maybe a woman-targeted brand, and you don't, as a man, you're maybe not getting the consumer part of that. And so when we would pitch Bala to a bunch of men many years ago, they had no idea what it was, and they would say, oh, cute wrist weights, and we're like, we're actually like a fitness brand, and they didn't quite understand it. So I think having the ability to pitch to the right consumer, like pattern matching, like you said, is a huge obstacle.
And I would also add, maybe I don't get the mic. I think what I would add to that is the biggest misconception is that you all need funding to have a business. You don't. So many women, especially right now, are bootstrapping.
So my other misconception is that women are building smaller companies, but I think they're actually building smarter ones. So I'd love your opinion on, what does it take to build a smarter company that's not necessarily relying on VC?
One of the things that we're very focused on at the Tory Burch Foundation is identifying entrepreneurs that are building businesses that are built to last. that are built for sustainability. It's one of the things that we look at. And in fact, 91% of the entrepreneurs that we've supported are still in business. And we've been doing this work for over a decade, a complete inverse of one of the VC's portfolios. And so it's really important that you're focused on the basics. We look at unit economics, we look at profit margin, we look at the growth. It does not have to be fast growth. If you're building to last, it means that it may not be a sky, rocket ship, but it means that you're building a product, you're building a service that people really want. And years ago, in 2018, I was invited to be a volunteer initially. That's how I learned about the Tory Burch Foundation. And as a venture-backed founder myself, I had to say that I was so impressed and I had so much respect for so many of the entrepreneurs that the Tory Burch Foundation was supporting. And in some ways, I was a bit jealous because many of them, in part because of not having access to the capital, were very focused on one audience, one stakeholder, and that was their consumer. And I found that as a venture-backed founder, though I had amazing investors on my cap table, Precursor and Bloomberg Beta and BetaWorks, I have to mention them because they were so good to me, I was constantly distracted by having to prioritize the investor for the next round and the milestones that I needed to hit for the next round, as opposed to what does the consumer need? What does she need? And what do we need to be building for her? And so I think that there's a way in which there's a freedom in being able to focus on the consumer.
Yeah, it really depends on what you're trying to build. Like, I bootstrapped both of my first companies. One was an agency and one was Create and Cultivate, and I was able to sell both of those companies. So I also think there's a myth that you need venture to eventually exit. So I was lucky enough to exit both of those companies. Now, with Cherub, we're 100% angel-backed. We've raised $1.5 million from just angel investors, and I think angel investors are an amazing opportunity for early-stage founders who are looking for capital, but maybe not the aggressive VC route, but they want to start building their businesses, get traction, get that product market fit, which makes you better fit for venture and allows you to have more leverage going into those negotiations.
I agree, it does depend on the business, but I typically always say it's great if you can bootstrap like the first year or two. It doesn't mean you can't raise later, maybe from VC, maybe from angels, but I think it's great if you can bootstrap at first, because it's really hard if somebody hands you a check and you're green at building a business and you say, oh, I have $1 million, I can go hire a team and spend all this money on marketing, and you name your price for your products at a certain price. It's almost impossible to back channel back to the beginning to make that work. So if you start out and you make the mistakes early with no money in the bank account, like that's the way to do it, at least for a little bit of time, so you can really understand the economics and become extremely disciplined.
The companies we see at Female Founder Collective who've been denied, all forms of capital or raise themselves have to go through a lot of pain, but they learn so much, like what you said, Natalie. And they become much smarter operators when they're not dependent on this big check in the account. And I feel like their decisions that they make are so much smarter. So you don't have to raise VC. There are amazing alternative forms of capital, purchase order financing, IP financing. There's all kinds if you just sort of peel under the hood. And we have to get off the drug that we all need to raise lots of money to be successful. Because like what you said also, or I think you said it, like my brother as my CEO would be distracted every quarter preparing for the board meeting instead of focusing on the business. And so it's not a cure-all. So now I'm going to ask you individual questions. This one's for you. What alternative funding models are you seeing that more successful women you meet at the foundation are leveraging? I don't know if this is...
Ask that one.
Several. You just mentioned them. One of the ones that we haven't really spoken about is the importance of community and the role that community can play in helping women to really elevate their businesses. We do have the founder of the Bow Collective, Nick Colbert, over there, who I met at here last year. And I was just outside of Dallas with the Bow Collective. For those of you who don't know, they're an organization of women who have $1 million plus businesses. And one of the things I was so impressed by is how they are an ecosystem that's constantly doing business with each other. and leveraging their own economy within the Bow Collective in order for all of their businesses to rise. And I think that's really important. Angel investing, of course, if you haven't been to Cherub, you should. Please make sure you give the URL. We're really interested in making sure that our entrepreneurs have access to Cherub because that's also an important form of capital. And it's a way of really demystifying the process of getting access to angel investors and to other investors, because sometimes that's just the hardest part. So there are so many, but those are just a couple.
Oh, okay. Can I answer that one really quickly too? Okay, love alternative funding because Bala had to do a ton of this because a brand like ours might have raised $10-20 million like easily, and we only ever raised $900,000 from Shark Tank. So love Cherub. I was talking about it with Jaclyn before this. So Cherub is amazing. If something like that existed, we might have like raised more money. So Cherub is amazing, but then there's a lot of alt things like Kick Further, Settle, Parker credit cards. Like there's so many alt fundings, Shopify Capital, that you can just get some fast cash if you need to like place a PO or something like that.
First of all, I'm loving this panel. But yeah, Cherub, investwithcherub.com. Just to give you context on what we do, we are basically democratizing in early stage investing. We've created a platform where angel investors, family offices, even VCs can join, and you can match with founders based on your interest of what you're looking to invest in. It's a mutual opt-in, so think of it like a dating app, like I'm interested, you're interested, so you're immediately getting that warm intro, which is what we all want and need. And then from there, you can do a deal. Over $7 million has been deployed to companies through Cherub introductions in the last 6 months. Woo! So we're getting capital in the hands of people who often can't get in the room, can't get that type of capital. We have over 3,000 founders and investors on the platform, so check it out.
I get asked all the time for angel networks, and there isn't a centralized place. So what you're doing with Cherub is making life very easy for founders. Natalie, this one's for you. You became a breakout brand in the category dominated by so many legacy fitness companies. So how did going up against them without all the capital that they might have constrain the business, but also become your superpower?
I think we definitely had a lot of constraints, but by now, looking back, it might have been a superpower. We were incredibly naive, and it was our first business, and it was really more like a side hustle. So we just used common sense a lot of times. And one of the common sense things told us, like, focus on wholesale because we didn't have money to put behind Facebook ads or any sort of customer acquisition costs. Like, we didn't even know what that meant. But so instead we said if we could get into like Goop or Free People, we won't acquire the customer directly, but we will get to use them as a marketing machine, and they might send an email and educate their customers, which are a lot more customers, on Bala. So we used wholesale a lot, and then this is like 8-9 years ago. We used affiliate before it was called affiliate. So we every now and then would gift an influencer, or they would DM us and they would want to work together. And this happened early with Melissa Wood Health, and we were like, we can't afford to work with her. It's like not even in the question. We're like, would you take a royalty, like a commission? And so we literally would just have her send her code and then PayPal her at the end of the month, like old school. Now there's so many platforms for that. So early days affiliate marketing worked for us.
I love that.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so this one's for you.
Okay.
What role do you see networks like Cherub play in expanding early stage access to capital for founders who might be otherwise overlooked?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because really when it comes to raising capital, 90% is network, 10% is right place, right time. You really have to be, and I know founders that are flying up to New York every week to go to dinners, to meet VCs, and it's geographic, it's sociographic, and not everyone has the time to do that when you're building a business. So for us, it's breaking down the barrier of opening up the gates to what's possible. One of the things we're really excited about is not only on getting founders funded, but we found that only 3% of accredited angel investors invest which is very low. And our bet is that it's because they're not getting good deal flow. So of the money that's been deployed on Cherub, 40% are first-time accredited angel investors writing checks. So what we're excited about is getting these angel investors off the sidelines and starting to write checks into these companies. So we really see it as an expansion of where angel investing is going. I think, we all know this, but like in the past 10 years, it really has become more about social capital as much as it is investing in these companies. And to Tiffany's point, investing in other founders and being able to support one another.
So let's talk about the idea that I meet a lot of founders and they're going to figure out their MVP and they're going to figure out their margin after they've gotten funding. And I'm telling them it is the opposite. Please have your MVP and your margin, a very healthy margin, figured out before you go to raise. So I'd love your perspective on how founders can focus on that and make that the priority versus I need to raise a lot of money and figure it out later.
I actually think that is the modern version of traction. I didn't know what that was when I started my company. I wanted to, and I think that if you care deeply about the person whose problem, or the company whose problem you're trying to solve for, I wanted to make sure that I was solving the problem. And to me, the evidence that I was solving the problem was that they were willing to pay for the solution. And for me, the fact that it was scrappy, that I just started it, that it was the MVP was only further evidence that if they paid for that, that would mean that I had something that I could create a flywheel around. And so I think it's so important that you start. And obviously, there are some industries and there are some companies for which you need some R&D. I mean, you need to get the inventory or you need to actually build it, but the earliest signs that you can actually monetize the product or the service, I think is the most important indicator that you've got something that then when you do have an influx of capital, you know that you can use that to grow the business. So often we try to raise funding when we don't actually have anything to scale.
Yeah, I was going to say, venture capital in general is fuel on the fire. It's not the match. And I think that's really important when you're building. You want to go into these conversations with as much leverage as possible. And the more data points you have, the MVP, the revenue, the customers, the signups, the more leverage you'll have in these negotiations before you give up too much of your company.
Yeah, I would say, kind of already said it, but launch before you're ready, launch in beta, get out there and understand your margins, because you might say, oh, wait, like my team is way too lean. I'm going to need to add numbers there, and then revisit and revise the whole thing and create the product or the numbers that work before going out to raise.
It's a tough learning lesson. When we took private equity in 2012, they were like, margin doesn't matter, grow at all costs. And then when we went to raise 2 years later, like, so how's your margin? Are you making money? No, we didn't have to focus on that. And turning that around was a very long and painful process. So don't get drunk on the money. You mentioned community, which is incredibly important to building a brand now. Now it goes without being said that if you have a product or a service, you have to build a community around it. That's probably why we have so many communities that all of us are building. So I'm curious, how does a founder go about building a community around their product?
I'm probably the worst person to answer that question. I believe so powerfully in community. I believe community as the product, as the service. My best definition of community I took from a gentleman named Fabian. He's head of an organization called the Together Institute. And it's just like a web of individuals who are, committed to a shared goal, a shared purpose. So a lot of community weaving, that's what, Fabian would call it, is really around making sure that people are centered around some kind of shared purpose. And that shared purpose has to be a higher allegiance than just to a product or a service. There must be something larger that we're here to do together in order to really move people forward. Certainly at the Tory Burch Foundation, our community is centered around women supporting other women in building lasting businesses and building sustainable businesses and really being there for one another transactionally, emotionally, spiritually, at a moment's notice. And if you've ever built something, you know that that is your bread and butter. 2 a.m., I'm crying, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, and I need to reach out to someone. And so for us, that's really important in terms of building a business, an organization, is having a much higher purpose than just the product or the service.
I was going to say, I don't think you build around a product or a service. I actually think that's really hard. I think you build community around a problem or an ethos or a shared experience. And I think that's how you can really then introduce a product into that. A good example of this is Bandit. I don't know if you know them. They're a running gear, essentially. But they built their community around the running community in New York, and they went super deep with them before they ever launched product, and it's because there was a shared experience, a shared value that they had. So I think that's something to think about as well.
Yeah, community definitely not built overnight, and I think especially when funding is a limitation, you have to hit it from many different angles. And so for Bala, what we did, because funding was a limitation, we would do walks. So we literally would get our friends and do like LA hikes and just like pass out 20 bangles, or they would bring their own and we would just hike through LA. And you know, you're getting content, so you're doing the online social community, but you're also doing in real life. And also gifting, like I would literally just bring my bangles to Y7 or Core Power Yoga and like gift the instructor. So really like grassroots, like guerrilla style community things. But I think there's lots of actual free community things you can do. We even would show up at a WeWork and be like have a little bangles booth. So just there's lots of ways to do it if you don't have money. If you have money, then you can really build a community in a cool way.
I also think that when you look at building community, there's a networking component to this. And sometimes networking can get a really bad rap, like cringe, she gave me the ick, she looked at my tag, to see who I was first. But your network is your net worth. And I think everything that we see happening with Female Founder Collective is the magic that's in our rooms or the magic that is in this room if you all decide to meet afterwards. So what tips would you have for women who are looking to fundraise but expand their community and network?
It's essential. Nearly all of the talent that I've been able to recruit, nearly all of the funding I've been able to raise, all of the jobs I've ever had, pretty much anything except for the conception of my kids, I've gotten through other people. And I am very fortunate in that I'm the cumulative investment of a lot of people, and particularly a lot of women who have poured themselves into me, given me opportunity. One of those people is a woman named Marie C. Wilson. She built the Ms. Foundation for Women. She started Take Our Daughters to Work Day. Tina Wells is here. She's nodding because she knows Miss Marie. And Marie used to say to me, Tiffany, it's going to get really lonely at the top if you don't send the elevator back down. So what I would say is, don't think about networking as something icky that you're doing for yourself. Think about it as you're contributing to a larger ecosystem of people supporting other people, and that really your investment in others is part of your strategy for success, but it's also a part of altruism, and it's a part of you giving back, to a larger community. It's critical.
Now there's so many amazing ways to network. I mean, Create and Cultivate, Female Founder Collective, like those are actual fun events. You can meet fun friends or other founders, and you might meet potential investors. So like it's easy to network and go to actually cool events. So that's great. But yeah, I would say I totally agree with everything you said, and I think networking also is not looking at someone's title and treating somebody like the exact same way. Don't try to network with somebody just for a specific reason. And then I will also say, if you feel like you're not in the big cities and you don't necessarily have access to these cool events, there's virtual events that they do. And one more thing. Oh, this platform called Intro is really interesting because you can pay, I think some of you guys are probably on it, but you can pay to book time with somebody. Like I could book Jaclyn for 15 minutes and pay a couple $100, maybe she's more. And then maybe I just am asking for advice, but I have a really good business idea, and that's the best way to get an in. Maybe she loves the idea and wants to put it on Cherub or invest in it. So I love that if you feel like you don't know where to start. Book a few people, see where it gets you.
Do you want to add anything?
I was just gonna say, like, the idea of like you can go far alone, you can go further together is so real. And I genuinely feel like the biggest misconception with networking is like it is a value exchange, and it doesn't mean it's gonna happen right away and you're gonna exchange with each other. It can happen down the line, it can happen in different areas, but maintaining those relationships is so important. I think a lot of the times people will reach out after having never talked to me for 3 years and be like, "Can you introduce me to this person?" And that's fine, but I think it's the people who have been supporting me throughout the career journey, who have texted me, who have been there for me, who have done stuff. I mean, Rebecca's a great example of that. Like, I know I can rely on her if I need something from her, but like I know vice versa, you could get something from me. So it has to be the value exchange.
I love that you said intro. We actually at Female Founder Collective have findyournorth.co. It's all women who you can actually book time with and be your advisors. So check it out. This is the last question for all of you. So who's trying to raise capital, just so I can frame this question properly? Okay, who has raised capital? Okay, so a lot of bootstrapping. And who's bootstrapping this? Awesome. Okay, I'm going to change my question. So based on the amount of women here who are bootstrapping, what is your piece of advice for the next year as everything in the landscape is changing with AI and some funding drying up and, you know, our ability to get funding going down? Not to be dire, but what's something they can do to continue to thrive and figure stuff out?
Community, community, community. Make sure that you are a part. There's so many Female Founder Collective. Join Luminary. If you're a Tory Burch Foundation fellow or you want to learn more information about that, please go to torybirchfoundation.org. Community, create and cultivate. There's so many communities. The most important resource that we have right now is each other. It really is each other. And so we have to stick together. We have to crowdsource the opportunities, and we have to make sure that we're lifting one another up.
I would say look at every dollar that leaves the business and literally ask, will this $100 subscription make me at least $100? Like every single dollar needs to make you money. And so Max and I, my husband and co-founder, we actually do this exercise often, not every month, but at least every couple of months, where we literally request every line item that we've spent. And I mean, that's a long list. And we go through it and we scrap things, we cut subscriptions, we say, oh, is that agency too expensive? Is it making enough money? And we literally look at the entire P&L, and we call it the cost cutting exercise. And we save the business so much money doing this, being like, how are we like bleeding 20K here? And so I would just say, look at every dollar.
I would also say read Natalie's new book, Bootstrap Empire. I was like, girl, we got to get the plug. But no, I was going to say one of the things I did with Create and Cultivate early days when I had no money is partnerships and bartering. There are so many amazing women building brands that are similar to yours, have like-minded customers. We're all looking for new customers. We're all broke. So let's figure out how we can do this together. Is there email swaps we can do? Instagram giveaways? Can you take over my Instagram? Can I take over your Instagram? I mean, I've had situations where I've invested in women's companies and they've invested in mine. So net, it was zero. And we're still saying we got investors. Like, there are ways to get around this, but you have to work together.
Yeah, during COVID with Rebecca Minkoff, we had no money, and so we were bartering. Again, I'll do you a favor, you do mine. You want to do a giveaway, you want to do a cross promotion, you want to swap mailing lists. I mean, we were all partnering together, and that had more impact than some paid activities, I would add. So I just want to thank you all for sharing, and hopefully you all got some great advice out of this. Please give them a hand, Tiffany, Natalie, and Jaclyn.